If you grew up in a world without constant connectivity, without smartphones in your pocket or Wi-Fi in every room, you might feel like you're struggling to keep up in today's hyper-connected world. But here's what psychology research is revealing: your analog childhood wasn't a disadvantage. It was a training ground that developed cognitive abilities most people today will never possess. While everyone around you was developing digital dependence, your brain was building something far more valuable. You're not behind the times. You're equipped with survival skills that are becoming increasingly rare. In this video, we explore the 5 psychological strengths that define people who grew up without the internet. If you've ever been called old-fashioned, if you felt out of place in a world obsessed with constant updates, or if you sometimes wonder why face-to-face connection feels more natural to you than digital communication, what you're about to discover will validate everything you've experienced. Let's break down what makes you different. Here's what's happening in your brain. When you grew up without algorithmic content feeding you dopamine hits every few seconds, your neural pathways developed differently. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for focus and concentration, learned to engage deeply with single tasks for extended periods. This might show up as your ability to read an entire book in one sitting, to work on a project for hours without checking your phone, or to have a 2-hour conversation without feeling the urge to scroll. While people around you struggle to focus for more than 8 seconds, which is what recent attention span studies are showing, you can sink into deep work states that feel almost meditative. This isn't you being slow to adapt. This is you having a cognitive superpower called sustained selective attention. Psychology calls this the ability to maintain focus on relevant information while filtering out distractions. In a world where companies spend billions engineering products to fragment your attention, your brain retained the ability to concentrate deeply. That's not a weakness in the modern world. That's your competitive advantage. Here's what's happening in your brain. When you couldn't Google every question the moment it appeared, your hippocampus and frontal lobes had to do the heavy lifting. You learned to work through problems using logic, memory, trial and error, and creative thinking. This might show up as your instinct to figure things out yourself before asking for help, your ability to navigate without GPS by remembering landmarks and directions, or your tendency to tinker with broken objects instead of immediately replacing them. You might find yourself remembering phone numbers, recalling facts from conversations years ago, or solving practical problems without reaching for your device. This isn't you being stubborn or resistant to modern convenience. This is you having developed what psychologists call internal locus of control and enhanced working memory capacity. Your brain learned that you are the source of solutions, not an external algorithm. When your neural pathways were forming, they built robust connections between memory storage, spatial reasoning, and executive function. In a world where people panic when their phone dies because they've outsourced their cognitive abilities to technology, you still have those abilities hardwired into your brain. That's resilience. Here's what's happening in your brain. Your mirror neuron system, which governs empathy and social understanding, developed through thousands of hours of face-to-face interaction. You learn to read microexpressions, body language, tone of voice, and the subtle energy shifts that happen in physical presence. This might show up as your ability to sense when someone is uncomfortable even when they're smiling, your preference for in-person meetings over video calls, or the way you can build rapport with strangers through eye contact and genuine presence. You might find yourself feeling exhausted by text-based communication because it lacks the nonverbal data your brain is wired to process. This isn't you being technologically incompetent. This is you having developed what emotional intelligence researchers call advanced interpersonal attunement. Your brain built neural networks for complex social cognition during critical developmental windows. Studies in developmental psychology show that children who engage primarily in face-to-face interaction develop stronger theory of mind, which is your ability to understand others' mental states. In a world where loneliness is epidemic despite constant digital connection, your capacity for genuine human connection is exactly what people are desperately missing. That's not outdated. That's essential. Here's what's happening in your brain. When you had to wait for your favorite show to air once a week, when you had to develop film and wait days to see your photos, when you had to physically go to the library to research topics you were curious about, your brain's reward circuitry learned to tolerate anticipation. This might show up as your ability to work toward long-term goals without needing constant validation, your comfort with silence and boredom, or your tendency to finish projects you start instead of jumping to the next shiny thing. You might find yourself less anxious than your peers because you're not addicted to the instant gratification cycle that drives compulsive checking behaviors. This isn't you lacking ambition or excitement. This is you having developed what psychologists call distress tolerance and emotional regulation. The famous marshmallow test studies on delayed gratification show that this ability predicts better life outcomes across health, relationships, and career success. Your brain learned that good things take time, that waiting doesn't equal suffering, and that anticipation itself can be pleasurable. In a world designed to eliminate all waiting, where people experience genuine distress if a web page takes 3 seconds to load, your nervous system remains regulated. That's psychological wealth. Here's what's happening in your brain. When you had hours of unstructured time without screens to fill every moment, your default mode network, the brain system responsible for imagination and self-reflection, had space to develop fully. You learned to generate your own entertainment, to daydream, to create elaborate imaginary worlds, and to sit with your own thoughts without external stimulation. This might show up as your rich inner life, your ability to entertain yourself without devices, or your creative approach to challenges. You might find yourself comfortable being alone because your mind is an interesting place to be, while others panic without constant input. This isn't you being antisocial or living in the past. This is you having developed what creativity researchers call divergent thinking and what contemplative neuroscience studies identify as enhanced introspective awareness. Your brain maintained the capacity for what psychologists call constructive internal reflection, which is directly linked to well-being, meaning-making, and innovative thinking. In a world where people report feeling empty despite consuming endless content, where anxiety spikes the moment external stimulation stops, your ability to generate meaning and joy from within is profound. That's self-sufficiency at the deepest level. If you've ever felt like you don't quite fit in a world that demands constant connectivity, if you've been called slow to respond or accused of not being present online enough, now you understand what's really happening. You're not failing to adapt. You're maintaining cognitive and emotional capacities that are becoming extinct in younger generations. The truth is that your analog childhood gave you neural architecture that can't be built through screens. Your sustained attention, problem-solving abilities, social intelligence, emotional regulation, and creative depth aren't relics of the past. They're survival skills for a future that desperately needs what you have. Subscribe for more psychology insights that explain who you really are. You're not behind. You're irreplaceable.